director of the Boys Town Center for Behavioral Health. That completes this segment of my presentation. I do have a little time left for questions if you have any. What I'm going to talk about this morning is adolescence, and I'm going to embed the conversation in a context of normality. The idea of normality in our culture now for kids has been skewed so that normal has come to mean problem-free. And I don't mean to suggest there aren't problem-free children. There probably are. It's just that there aren't very many of them. They're in the tail of the distribution. And because they're so rare, they shouldn't represent normality for the rest of us, but they do. And I fault Madison Avenue and the entertainment industry for this problem, because the children and the youth they select for their products, to represent their products or act out their roles, are always perfect. They're handsome and charming and beautiful and poised and dignified and wise beyond their years and mature and confident and charismatic. In any given scene, they usually show up better than the adults do that are in the scene with them. And these images that have been produced by Madison Avenue and the entertainment industry, they wash over the culture 24/7. And they set up a sort of an expectancy template or an assumptive template that that's what kids actually look like. And it gives us the idea that maybe normal is something very hard to attain. This is an example. This isn't a Gerber baby, but it might as well be. This is what people consider to be a normal baby. This is the baby that they think they're going to get. This is the baby white people think they're going to get. Okay. Now, if you study the slide that I've shown rigorously, you'll see that it isn't normal in lots of respects. There are all kinds of abnormalities presented in this slide. For example, the infant's naked, but that's not abnormal. That's not unusual in any way. The infant's alone, that too isn't really unusual. The infant doesn't have anything to play with but its hands or feet. Even that's not that unusual. But under those circumstances, this infant is perfectly content. That is unusual. In fact, where do you get one of those? There's no poop or pee at the hindquarters. And those of you that have children know that the probability that an infant will defecate or urinate on a surface is a probability of the color of the surface, its absorptive quality, and its expense. And by now there should be a mess back in here, and there isn't. No gunk in the ear, no snot on the lip, no crumbs in the hair, no spit up on the chest. In fact, the whole idea of spit up is sort of a Gerber baby concept. Gerber babies spit up. Regular babies puke. Now, I don't mean to suggest that the baby that people think they're going to get, as I indicated earlier, is a white baby. These babies come in different sizes, shapes, and colors. But this slide, too, is a lie, or represents a lie. There are 10 infants here, and they don't have anything to play with but their hands and feet. They also don't have anyone to play with because at this age and stage, they don't really exist for each other. So here they are, basically alone, with nothing to play with, and not a single one of them is crying. Now, is that possible? Well, yes, this is not a photoshopped slide. But have you ever watched a photographer try desperately on a holiday or a birthday to get a shot of an infant that can go on the family birthday card or Christmas card where the infant isn't crying or screaming, and how hard they try to get that shot, how many antics they have to go through, how many toys they have to have set to the side. I mean, they can get their shot, but they have to try really hard to get that one from that one. Here's 10. Is it possible? Yes, it's absolutely possible, but this is a 1 in a million shot. But it's the one that gets distributed. It's the one that gets disseminated, it's the one that gets distributed, and it's the one that feeds into the whole idea that this represents what kids are really like. And it sets up sort of a notion that normal babies are neat, clean, quiet, and happy. And they're fun to have. And they're fun to hold. And they're fun and easy to communicate with. And they're fun and easy to clean up. They're fun and easy to feed. They are fun and easy to toilet train. They're fun and easy to put down for nap or bedtime. They're fun and easy to supervise. Even the family pet can pursue that job successfully. They're fun and easy to take out in public. When they get a little older, they get along very well with their siblings, and they get along well with their friends. And when they go to school, they study hard in school, and they do darn well in school. And even after school, even as adolescents, do they leave school and go out in the streets smoking, joking, and toking and bringing shame upon their families? No. These kids go straight home from school, change their clothes, clean their room, sit down and do their homework, and they invite their parents to supervise the work. But the point I made earlier is not everybody gets one of those. So a lot of people get infants that have a full range of human emotions, and one of those emotions, a dominant one, is anger. So how do you know when baby's mad at mommy? Well, when baby gives mommy the finger, as this one's doing, usually it's a pretty good sign. And it gets easier to tell as they get older. And they're not always fun to have. And they're not always fun to hold. They're not always fun and easy to communicate with. They're not always fun and easy to clean up. They're not always fun and easy to feed. They're not always fun and easy to put down for nap or bedtime. They're not always fun and easy to toilet train. They're not always fun and easy to supervise. They're not always fun and easy to take out in public. They do not all get along well with their siblings. They do not all get along well with their peers. They do not all study hard in school. They do not all do well in school. They do not all go straight home from school. And they don't all invite their parents to participate and supervise the work they do after school. Here's a little different take on the point I've made so far. These are ranked behavior problems in 3-year-old children, ranked by the parents in accord with how disruptive they are and how hard these problems are to solve. And here's what's interesting about this list. These are not pathologies in 3-year-olds. These are not abnormalities in 3-year-olds. These are developmentally normal skill deficits. And yet they show up like abnormalities against the backdrop of this notion that the normal child is problem-free. And that extends all the way to adolescence. So the whole cultural view of adolescent normality is that normal means problem-free. And then if the kids have problems, then they're psychologically defective or emotionally or behaviorally, intellectually defective, or the product of defective parents. So my view is different than that. My view is that problems in adolescence are typical, to be expected, and they can masquerade as a form of temporary insanity, and it's most of them are perfectly normal. The problem with adolescence emerges in a divergence in brain development, which I presume most of you have already heard about because it's been pretty well disseminated in our culture. That one part of the brain, what I'm going to call the limbic system, or the emotional brain, emerges and develops early, and it's fully developed by the onset of adolescence. Now, inside this brain, there isn't any reflection, there isn't any problem solving, there isn't any planning for the future. In fact, very little future-oriented thought happens here. This is a reactive part of the brain. It's responsible for our survival. It's responsible for our reproduction. It's responsible for reactions that are necessary in the day-to-day life to keep the species and individual members of the species alive. It has enormous power. The last time that any of you lost control, the reason that you lost control is this part of your brain took over whatever you were doing at the time. Then after the dust had settled and you had calmed down, another part of the brain took over, that purple part that you see there, that's the prefrontal cortex, or what I'm going to call the wise brain, wise mind. It's reflective, it's planful, it's responsible for impulse constraint. It's responsible for putting off Small gains now for bigger gains later. It's also reflective in the sense that when anybody loses control and later they review the situation, they review it with their wise mind and they see the devastation that the emotional mind can actually wreak if it is given full control. Which leads me to adolescence. In adolescence, the emotional brain is fully developed and powerful, and the wise mind, or the prefrontal cortex, is underdeveloped. So the part of the adolescent that's responsible for managing their behavior, especially when it's emotional or impulsive or potentially could lead to trouble, is really not well suited to the job and really won't be in most kids until around the ages of 24 or 25. That sets the stage for a lot of problems to be exhibited during that period we call adolescence. It's when the emotional mind gets out of the yard, so to speak, because the fence around the yard imposed by the wise mind or the prefrontal cortex isn't very well established. But I'm a shrink, so I'm responsible for sitting in an office and using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for the American Psychiatric Association as a guide as I assess what's in front of me, and I'm expected to apply a diagnosis of some sort or another found in that text to what's in front of me. And in other words, I'm responsible for declaring that the person in front of me is mentally ill in some respect. And I see a lot of teenagers, and I hear about a lot of problems that these teenagers engage in. But after I know everything about the problem, I'm frequently reluctant to apply the concept of mental illness to them or to what I've heard. I'm not saying the problems aren't there. I'm just saying that in many respects they seem like they're more normal, more a part of adolescence than they are part of mental illness. So in order to continue the conversation with the people in front of me, and to continue to start the conversation with the people in front of me here, I invented my own categories. So I'm actually communicating, I know this is a problem, but I'm communicating something else, and that is, it's not a big enough problem to have a DSM diagnosis in many respects. It doesn't belong in the esis, osis, ological categories that are found in the DSM. So this is just a sample, just a sampling of the categories I've invented, and I'm going to go through each. I can't go through them all, we don't have time for that. So we'll start with rationality deficit disorder. What that means is the rational mind, the wise mind, is either absent or not completely present. And it doesn't take a shrink to diagnose this condition. You can do it very easily yourself. You just have to have an adolescent that's done something that you consider pretty nutty. Say, for example, they microwave a cricket. So you're going to have questions. And the questions might be, why did you do that? And what were you thinking? And at that point, you don't need to wait for answers, and you don't need to go any further. You have your answer. If those three things happen, the event and the questions, you have rationality deficit disorder, and you're setting the stage for heartache to go any further, because I'll tell you what the honest answers to those questions are. Why did you do that? Because I felt like it. And what were you thinking? Well, I wasn't really thinking at the time. And see, those are completely unsatisfactory answers to the rational brain that we bring to these events. We don't understand how those could be true, and parents will frequently ask for the real reason. They have the real reason. So now they put the kid in a situation where he actually has to, or she has to lie, so that the rational brain in front of them will have something that's satisfactory to it. So they start inventing things. This is the dawn of, in my opinion, of the inadequacy of parent-adolescent conversation, where a parent expects any portion of the conversation to have truth in it. So the adolescent might say, well, why did I microwave the cricket? Well, I'll tell you why. You know I'm taking biology. And yes, I've gotten behind in my homework. You know that. Right now we're studying biological processes, and the process that we're working on is desiccation. And the other night I heard you and Mom downstairs nattering at each other about the crickets that have come into the house in the fall. And then I walked by the microwave because one of you was heating up some tea, and I thought to myself, oh, This is how I could get my experiment done, because I was supposed to do a real experiment on desiccation. That would have taken me about 8 days. And I realized I could use the microwave and get the assignment done in about 10 minutes. So I captured a cricket, euthanized it, of course, and then the rest is, well, why are you asking me this anyway? Now, obviously the whole story came right out of the back end of a bull. But who's the author, who's the architect, who's the responsible party for what we now know as a big fat lie? Well, the truth was attempted, but it did not prevail. In order to get out of the interaction with the adults, the kid has to come up with something, so they come up with some kind of rational reason they think their rational minds will buy, and it ends up being a fib, because really, adults have a hard time with the truth of adolescent life. And adolescents know this. We'll talk about this further when we get to other conditions. So, woe is me, Nia. I'll pronounce this. Woe is me, Nia. There. That's the condition, and it has a lot of components to it. Excuse me. As we know, adolescent life is turbulent emotionally and often moody for no apparent reason. And anger shows up in surprising places when there isn't anything there to suggest anger is warranted. And parents and adults that are in a relationship with adolescents sometimes are taken completely by surprise by how upset these kids get over so little. What that involves is really a misunderstanding of life as an adolescent and how many forces there are that impinge upon it that bring about a sense of unhappiness, a sense of anger, a sense of frustration. You start with puberty, because it starts there. This hits them like a freight train. Probably the adults too, really. But it comes out of nowhere. It just comes completely out of nowhere for them. We'll use boys as an example. The boys are going along in their pre-puberty life, and they have no use for girls. None. Completely useless beings. And their humanity hasn't been established. So their beings, whether they're human beings, needs to be determined down the road. Why are they so useless? Lots of reasons. One, they don't play football. Two, they don't play rough and tumble games of any kind. Three, they dress too neatly. Four, they seem to have the answer a lot in class. Five, they brown-nose the teacher. Six, you can actually read their handwriting. Seven, they cry when you push them down. And eight, then they tell on you. Who needs this? But that's pre-puberty. So the boys are looking out at those girls, useless human beings, but then puberty hits, and just a short while later, they look at that same group of beings, those girls, and all of a sudden they're thinking, whoa, I'd like to get me some of that. And then they think, well, I better look my best. And they'll never look worse in their life, ever. Start with the adolescent boy hair. Who can explain it, really? They'll never have more of it. They'll never do weirder things with it. They'll dye it multiple colors. They'll cut it off on one side or the other, or both sides. They'll cut it off in the middle, leave the sides. They won't wash it for a couple of weeks. They'll tie things in it. They'll spray stuff on it. They'll put stuff in it that they wouldn't even put in their car. And they're walking around with a, what? Look on their face as you stare at their hair. Then moving down into this region here. This is a general disaster area during puberty for boys. It starts with, but it doesn't end with acne, which is nature's birth control. Now, why do I say that? I don't know if you know this about teenagers or not, but they don't want to have sex with kids that have acne because it looks a lot like something you could catch. You know, it looks like measles or chicken pox. You know, these parents, they look at their boy and they say, oh man, he looks like he was in a dart fight and he didn't have any darts. I got to get him some help. I'm going to get him some treatments for his acne. If they bring this to me, I caution them against this enterprise. I suggest that if they're interested in not being grandparents at an early stage of their life, they might consider just letting the acne run its course for 2 or 3 years, and they'll have peace of mind as far as teenage sex is concerned, and their son. Moving down the body, down in here. It starts to do things it never did before. and it starts to grow things that never grew before. And one of those things is something I call hair down there. And these kids, they hate that. They don't want to think about it, they don't want to know about it, they don't want to talk about it, and the last thing they want on God's green earth is for anything about it to come out of a parent's mouth. Which means now the parents, if they recognize it, have what I call radioactive power, which they can use in strategic ways. So your average teenager has an ambition, has a method, actually. Let's call it either campaigning or haranguing, you pick, their parent for what they want. And they can run these campaigns or the harangue really for hours on end. They require very little voltage, very little energy, and they have a very, very simple structure, simple linguistic structure. It's two forms. One is, can I have it? Why not? Everybody else has one. I'm the only one who doesn't. Or, can I do it? Why not? Everybody else gets to. I'm the only one whose parents say he can't. And they can just run this, and they pretty much wear their parents down to a little nub, and they give in. Unless they've been counseled by me to use their radioactive power. So, what I recommend is for the parent to get in the middle of the campaign, or the harangue, depending on what term you want to use, and then at a point where the kid has taken a small break to get a breath, say, excuse me, son, I know you want to continue your campaign, and I certainly want to join in with you. But can I just ask you a quick question? Are you getting any hair down there? And see, that conversation is now over, because he doesn't want to know about it, doesn't want to think about it, doesn't want to talk about it, and the last thing he wants is for anything about that to come out of his mom's mouth. So not only is the conversation over, but he won't go near her for days for fear that she'll bring that up again. So she's got radioactive power. Let's see what else. They have many other troubles, these boys. One, their voice. It's not there for them when they really need it. So another thing is that they desire female company, and they have no capacity at all to communicate to females. They don't know how to talk to girls. Where would they have learned this? I mean, just a short while ago, the girls were completely useless human beings. So they've had no practice other than to communicate how useless those beings are. Well, this is not a very good way to make friends and influence people with the opposite sex, is to declare the person in front of you to be completely useless and possibly not human. But maybe some kids, they got some practice because they have an older sister, and so they learn some moves. They appear to their friends to be slick, and they actually can talk to girls. They're still not out of the woods because of this voice problem, because they can't depend on it. So let's say Mr. Slick, he sees Susie as she comes into the school building, and he walks over to her and he goes, hey, Susie, you are looking spectacular. You're looking fine. But I suppose you know that. But I want you to know that I saw you out in the quad, and I know you saw me too, because I caught your eye catching mine. And I don't know if you noticed this or not, but right at that moment, the clouds above you parted, and the sun shot through, and a shaft of sunlight caught your hair, and there was a burst of, I don't know, golden fire is all I can think of. And it impacted me so powerfully that I just felt the urge to come over and share with you the sentiment that bubbled up to the surface. I'm going to have a hard time putting this into words, but let me try. Gosh, I just think you're special. I just think you're so swell. And I was wondering, would you like to go out with me sometime? I can't count on their voice. It's just not there when they absolutely need it. Anyway, I moved down to chronic boredom. This is a period of boredom for them, but not all of it's boring. I'll tell you the part that's boring. The part that's boring involves all the stuff that we sanction, all the stuff that we find permissible, all the stuff that we really want them to do. That they find boring. Working on the high school float without cigarettes or beer, not fun to them. Homework, not fun to them. Civics club, I don't think so. Now, the stuff they do find fun is all the stuff we don't want them to do. So, if parents are good at being parents, then they keep their kids from the stuff they don't want them to do. That means they're always doing stuff they don't want to do, and they're perpetually bored. They need to be special. That's a kind of a hallmark of adolescent life is the need or the feeling that one really should be special. And probably never leaves us, but it's really, really most potently present during adolescent life. And the problem is they're not. In fact, it's probably the least special time of life. Now, they formerly were special. As infants, they were special. Infants don't need to be special, and they don't have to try to be special. They just are special, just for being that way. And then toddlers are special, same deal. And preschoolers are special, same deal. Elementary school kids are still special. Even for a while in middle school, there's a little bit of specialness left. But no need to be special. But then adolescence hits, and now they need to be special, and they're no longer special in almost any way. And the divergence for them is very upsetting. They want to be seen as very unique, and that uniqueness to be special on this planet and in this family and in this school and with this person is really kind of hard to bring about for the adult involved. They have conflicting needs, and the one that's most potently present that you know of and I know of is their need to be independent, which conflicts with the amount of dependency that's still left, given the nature of the mismatched development in the brain. So, in their emotional mind, well, they could make it on their own if we just get out of the way at the age of 16. You know, they could leave home and get that special little job at the convenient mart, perhaps, working the night shift, and get a nice apartment down at 24th and Leavenworth and have their friends over every night. So they walk around with fantasies sort of like that, and if they introduce them to their parents, the parents are quick to say there's no way that you could ever live on your own, and that kind of thing, so they more or less keep it to themselves. So as long as it stays in the imagination, it remains emotionally valid for them, and it's really, really hard on them when they come up against the hard reality of the fact that they really do depend on their parents ongoingly. So in their mind, they could make it on their own at the age of 16, and then they realize they don't have any money and they need to meet Tom at Oakview Mall to go to the show, and they got to get $5 or $10 from their parents, and now they need a ride. And these kinds of things occur all throughout adolescence, where they are independent in their mind and dependent in actuality, and it just sets up more woe-is-mania. I have a lot more examples, but I just want to give you a sample of these conditions. Let me move on to situational mutism. They're not mute, and this isn't a period of time where they forget how to speak. This, in my opinion, is the most talkative time of life. This is the time when they're wanting to talk about everything. They just don't want to talk to us about anything, unless it's to ask permission for something. Why? Because we've trained them not to talk to us. We've trained them that if we get into a conversation with them, no matter where it starts, it's going to end up on these topics. And, you know, they don't want to talk about these topics. And we really do want to talk about these topics, and we feel like they've never been adequately addressed, and so we keep bringing them up. And so they pretty much learn how to answer any question that we ask monosyllabically, you know, or some version of that. Very short answers. Nothing. I don't know. I don't know. Nothing. Yeah, okay. That kind of thing. Not because those are the true answers, but because they're trying to get in and out of the conversation as quickly as they can. And I have been doing my work for a long time, a very long time. And so I've sat in the presence of parents and their adolescent children thousands of times. I've got a pretty darn good sample. And it looks to me to be biologically impossible for a parent to listen to an adolescent talk really, like say what's really on their mind, for more than 2 minutes without offering some kind of correction or advice. And I haven't ever, in all those times with all those kids, heard one of them ask for advice. Now, I'm in the advice-giving business, and I have 45 people working for me, and they're in the advice-giving business. And of all the people that are in my healthcare center, I give the least amount of advice. Why? Well, because I'm the most senior, and I realized that even when people come to see me ostensibly for advice, they don't want advice. And so I wait until I know that the person across from me really wants advice before I give it. Well, I'm watching these parents cough off advice in the presence of a kid who definitely doesn't want it. And then they wonder why he doesn't talk to them more often. The way to get kids to talk is to listen to them without giving advice or correction. And I just have to tell you one thing about advice. It is always a criticism. There's no way to give advice without having an implicit criticism. Because if you feel compelled to give advice, that means however they're doing it, it isn't correct. Your way needs to be considered. In there, even though you didn't say they were doing it wrong explicitly, you said they were doing it wrong implicitly. And this is one of the reasons why people are reluctant to take advice, because that means they need to take criticism, and it's definitely true in adolescence. Okay, they don't tell the truth. Alert the media. I mean, they don't. Here's the truth of adolescent life. If they follow all the rules, all of them, and they never tell a lie, so they follow all the rules and never tell a lie, then here's what's true about that. They will never, under any circumstances, have any fun. In order to have fun, the kind of fun that they really enjoy, they need to lie to us or bend the rules a little bit. However, folks sometimes think, well, this means they're immoral or they lack a moral infrastructure. It's not true. They have a moral infrastructure. Because they don't like lying to their friends, and they don't like breaking the rules of their group. They don't mind breaking our rules. They don't mind lying to us, because those are survival-oriented skills. I'm not sanctioning this, by the way. I'm not saying that lying and rule-breaking should be forgiven completely and the kids should get a complete pass. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's to be expected, even from the best of them. If you think you've got a kid that never lies to you, I've got some bad news for you. So they do have a moral infrastructure. There will come a time when the group that we're part of now will be their group, and they won't want to lie to that group, and they want to follow that group's rules. But they're not in the adult group right now. They're in the teenage group. They follow teenage rules. They follow the expectancy for teenage honesty. And then one day they'll be in our group, and they'll do the same thing with us. I don't make the news. I just report the news. So I've got some news that I'm reporting. They are in a highly sexualized culture. I'm trying to get a sense of the ages of the people in front of me. The culture that they're being raised in is way, way more sexualized than the one I was raised in. And I think way, way more sexualized than the one many of you were raised in. And more sexualized than the one all of you were raised in. But the difference between the way it was when I was growing up and now is like the difference between lightning and lightning bug. It's enormous. It's everywhere. Back when I was being raised, pornography meant either Playboy or Penthouse, and it was in this 20th century item called a magazine. Now you'd have to be hard-pressed to even find one of those, but finding pornography is just a click away. And you know what? They know far more about computers than you and I do. I work out at this Musclehead gym, and it's full of these little television sets that are all around the gym, and they're all tuned to one station. And the station beams music videos to the people that are working out. And they're almost all sort of thematically the same. They involve either nubile young women, curvaceous, scantily clad, that are gyrating suggestively to the camera and lip-syncing lascivious lyrics. And sometimes there are men dancing in front of them, or the other way around, young men doing the same thing. And these images, well, they're powerful images. The people in the gym are glued to the set. This is just one little station, one little gym, in one little place in America. How many channels on your TV do you think you have? You probably don't even know. They know. I mean, this stuff is everywhere. There is no escaping it. They are in a highly sexualized culture. You think you're going to be safe during family hour at night, and you've narrowed down the number of channels that you have. And as far as programming content is concerned, you may be very safe, but then on comes a commercial, and then comes the question, Daddy, what's erectile dysfunction? It's just no getting away from it in this culture. So here we have these kids, they're underprepared in every possible way. Underprepared emotionally, underprepared cognitively, underprepared behaviorally. They often feel unloved, that's that stage of life. They often have unfilled time, they're often unsupervised. If we think sex isn't going to be part of the equation, that's craziness on our part. Am I saying we just have to let it happen? No, not at all. I work at Boys Town. Boys Town is a Catholic institution. If one of our kids gets pregnant, it's a serious problem. It's a serious problem for anybody, but it's particularly serious for us, because now we have to figure out a way for that child to get raised, because that's the only way it's going to go down. I'm saying that we need to be prepared for sexuality to be part of their life and take steps to minimize it as much as possible. What do you see here? Can you see two white faces? Yeah? Pretty clearly? Now, take another look and see if you can see a black vase. Can you see a black vase? Can you tell me which one of those is correct? What? Really? You can look at something right in front of your eyes and you can say it's correct either way depending on how you look at it. Is that what you're telling me? Is that how you are with your politics? Is that how you are with your kids? You know, when they have a view and you have a view and they're telling you it from their perspective and you're telling them it from your perspective, do you take in both perspectives and consider them equally valid? Is that how you are with your religion? Is that how you are with anything that you think is right? No. When you're right, you're right. That's how we are. That's the kind of being that we are. But how we are right depends on our circumstances. And the person across from you, how they're right, is dependent upon their circumstances. And I'm not saying you have to accept what's across from you. You can tell them that they're wrong and live like they're wrong and believe that they're wrong. It's just that you're not going to have a relationship with them. They'll go on in their life, you'll go on in yours, everybody will be happy in their own lives. But if that person across from you happens to be your son or daughter, now we got a problem. Because from their point of view, they're right about most of what they see and say. Now, we know far more than they do. We have much more contextual information. We have a historical view. We know what it was like in high school, and we know what we do differently if we could go back knowing what we know now. And so we feel compelled to tell them that what they're doing in high school is possibly wrong from our very well experienced and educated view. But it just makes them wrong. They don't listen much. And we don't get their point of view. They don't feel listened to. They don't feel validated. Therefore, they don't feel like talking to us about anything that really matters to them, because we seem to want to talk to them about what matters to us. I'm pretty good at getting adolescents to talk to me. It sometimes angers parents that I don't come down on the kids across from me harder, more quickly. Now, I'm a notorious hard ass. People that know me well professionally know that's the case. But I have a gentle approach to my clients as I'm trying to establish a relationship so that they trust me. I can't establish that relationship if I, right out of the chute, start telling them how wrong they are about everything they just told me. I need to see the world from their point of view, so I can see where it went south or where it could go north if we took some different steps. But in order to get them to talk to me, I can't critique what they're talking to me about. I have to listen to it, and I have to listen with interest and affirmation. And this is what I'm suggesting. You want to get to know a teenager, you have to listen to them and recognize that they may be giving you the black vase because that's what they see. And that doesn't mean you should give them the white faces because that's what you see. You should actually listen for a while and get a sense of that vase before you make any rhetorical moves. Am I making sense here? Let me go back to the brain. This is a limbic time of life. They crave emotional stimulation. You might say they crave drama. Well, drama is suffused with emotional stimulation. So they don't crave drama per se. It's just a very nice vehicle for emotional stimulation. So I happen to believe that the people in front of me don't crave drama, or most of you, and aren't necessarily out day in and day out on a quest for emotional stimulation, no matter what form it comes in, as they are. So if you get into an argument with a teenager, you are sunk. First of all, why would you do that? Because that's debate school for them. Because the bad news is that you and I, we're as good at arguing as we're going to get. They're not. They're still learning some moves. They're still practicing. And if you get in there and start arguing with them, well, they're learning your moves, and they're learning how to argue better with you. That's problem number one, is that you're going to argue with them, you just get them better at arguing with you. But problem number two is based on something that has not ever happened in the history of our species, and is not likely to ever happen in the future of our species. And that is for an adolescent in the middle of an argument with an adult to stop and go, oh, I didn't see it that way. I totally didn't see it that way. You are so right. I was wrong. I can't believe how wrong I was. But based on what you've told me here, I will henceforth go forward, incorporate your view into mine, and change my behavior accordingly. Thank you so much. Never going to happen. Ever. So don't try to make it happen. Here's the third problem. When you get into an argument with a teenager, they get worked up emotionally. You get worked up emotionally. 15 minutes later, they want a sandwich. 5 days later, you and I are still going over that argument in our mind, thinking about where we lost control and how we weren't going to be like our parents, and I never meant to be that way, and geez, well, man, I was too hard on him, and suffering and suffering. They're not suffering over these things, except for a few minutes, and even then, it's not real suffering. You know, if I take you and a goldfish and throw you both into the Missouri, which one of you do you think is going to be more uncomfortable? You know what I'm saying? It's the same thing with a teenager. I take you and a teenager and throw you both into an argument. Which one of you do you think is going to be more uncomfortable? You are. They're not uncomfortable in these situations. They kind of crave them. And I'm suggesting try not to deliver them too often. So, I have some tips for adults dealing with an adolescent lunatic. I can stop before I go through them, though, and see if anybody has any questions up till this point. Okay. So, let me start with be a dispassionate cop. Excuse me. That means in an interaction, especially one that involves discipline with a teenager, act like a dispassionate cop. And for most infractions, cops act dispassionately. So for example, speeding tickets. Let me assume that I'm not the only one in this room that's had a speeding ticket before. Right? I don't need you to raise your hand, but I know some of you have had a speeding ticket. So the officers involved, when you get a speeding ticket, they tend to act dispassionately. They pull you over, they run your plates, then they come up to your car, they ask you to roll down the window, and they ask you for your driver's license and registration. They tell you what they saw you doing. They tell you to hold on for a few minutes. They go back to their car, look up that material, write out a document specifying what you did, and then they come back to your car, and they show it to you, and they ask you to sign it. They tell you how you can satisfy it, give you back your stuff, and then say some variation of have a nice day, or drive careful out there, I'll see you, bye. The point I want to make is the effect that has on the driver. That's you and I. What happens is transformative. It's remarkable, really. So it just starts with, when you drive away, we drive away, we signal to leave the shoulder. Nobody ever signals to leave the shoulder of a highway unless they've gotten a ticket. Because the signal is not for other drivers, the signal is for the officer. We're signaling the officer that we are really fantastic drivers. This has been a terrible mistake, and we are so good at driving that we actually signal when we leave the shoulder of a highway. Then we drive down the highway with our hands at 10 and 2, like we just got out of driving school, under the speed limit, and we drive like that for days. Why? Because we got a ticket. That's the sole reason. That's all that's necessary. All these kids need is the ticket. They don't need the drama. They don't need the warnings. They don't need anybody to come along and connect the dot of what they just did with the tragedy, with what's going to happen if they do it again. They don't need any of that. They don't need any emphasis. They don't need any emotion. They don't need any anger. They just need a specification of what they did and a penalty. Will one penalty do it? No, it won't. It might take 20 or 30, because we could have had a whole conversation on how kids learn. Fundamentally, they learn through repetition, followed by contrast, followed by a change in how they feel. That's how we all learn. You do something, and it produces a change in experience. And there are only two possibilities. One is pleasant, and the other is unpleasant. So if you do something, and it produces an unpleasant change in experience, so for example, you got a ticket, you're a little less inclined to do that again. Or if it produces a pleasant change in experience, we're more inclined to do that again. But we tend to expect one-trial learning in kids, and it is really rare. So here's some examples. How many times do you think a young man has to pee on an electric fence to learn that's not a very smart thing to do, and to learn a little bit about electricity and the direction and velocity of its travels? That's one-trial learning. And it doesn't matter if they got an IQ of 50 or 150. They learn it the first time for life. How many times would you and I have to stick our hand into open flame to realize that's a pretty stupid thing to do? Once. Lasts a lifetime. Doesn't matter if you got an IQ of 50 or 150. But very, very little human experience is that powerful. Most requires a lot of repetition. There's also some one-trial learning on the positive end of things. How many times do you think somebody has to inject heroin into their system in order to learn that there's a very, very pleasant feeling to be obtained if you do that? It's instantaneous, it lasts a lifetime, they'll crave it forever. You only have to do it once. If we could use blowtorches and heroin to teach kids stuff, think how easy it would be. No, you could teach little kids to line up, raise their hand to be called upon, chew with their mouth closed, share, do their homework, ask for more, do their chores, ask for more, and then hang around just to see if they could make the adults happy, just so they could get the heroin and avoid the torch. We don't have tools like that. We don't have anything even close to that powerful. What we have, instead of blowtorches, are time out, I guess, grounding, withdrawal of privileges, disapproval. This is unpleasant stuff, very unpleasant. But it isn't so unpleasant they're going to learn it the first time, or the second time, or the 10th time even. Repetition is necessary. Same thing on the positive end. What do we have? We got praise, privileges, money, stuff, extra curfew, friend over for the night, extra TV in the room, whatever stuff. That's pleasant stuff. Kids like that stuff. But the stuff isn't very powerful compared to heroin or some other things I could list, meaning lots of repetition is necessary. So the point I'm making here about the dispassionate cop is the tool that you have is the ticket. It produces an unpleasant change in experience. We've seen it exert its influence over our behavior. The ticket will exert influence over their behavior. For us, the effect tends to last a few days. For them, it might not even last that long. In order for it to be a lifetime, it's got to be repetitious and keep the consistent message going so the kiddo realizes, every time I pee on that fence, the same thing happens, and I'm not going to do it anymore. Try silence. I'm going to show you what I mean. How you like it? We don't like it. They hate it. They're completely lost in a context of silence. They're waiting for you to say something they can argue with. They're waiting for you to say something that they can look back on and say, you were an idiot too. As long as there's something coming out of your mouth, they're at home. If there's nothing coming out of your mouth, they're at sea. They don't know what's going to happen next. They don't know what you're thinking. They want to get it all out in the open so they can deal with it. Now, I don't know if this is true for you, but this is absolutely true for me, and that is that when my lips have been pressed together so that sound cannot be emitted out of the oral aperture, I have never said anything stupid. I've never said anything I would regret later. I've never offended anybody. I've never made a verbal mistake. And when we're dealing with teenagers, typically we're dealing with them on an emotional level if they've done something that we consider wrong. So we're a little emotional, and the stuff that we are inclined to say, especially while the iron is still hot, could potentially be something we regret later. So when you don't know what to say, when you don't know what to do, you always have a card to play. Say and do nothing, and just let it sit there. Meanwhile, your emotional brain will calm down, and your wise mind will take over, and you'll come up with a reflective response that has more strategic value. If you jump right in emotionally, you're at great risk for saying and doing something that you're going to regret later. Now, here's the thing. Even though the kids, they have like a weak reflective mind, they still periodically are reflective. So you have this interaction with them, and you go nuts, and they go nuts, and you guys go nuts together, and then later the kiddo reflects on the interaction, sort of listens to the mental tape of it, if you will, and there are two voices on that tape, and both sound insane, and the one coming from the older person on the tape justifies everything that comes from the younger person on the tape, and so they learn nothing from it. But if they review the tape, and there's only one voice on that tape, and it's theirs, they can hear the insanity and learn from it, because they are capable of reflection, just not to the extent that we are. And they will reflect. And if what they're reflecting on is complete idiotic behavior on their part, well, to some extent, that's going to produce at least a mild, unpleasant experience from which they can learn. Aim for caution, not total prevention or elimination. They're going to do the stuff. You can't stop them. I work at Boys Town. Our kids do the stuff. I mean, we minimize it tremendously, but we can't stop them. You did the stuff. We all did the stuff. I'm not saying you did all the stuff. Maybe you did all the stuff. I'm looking for a really satisfied look on somebody's face. I did all the stuff. You did some of the stuff. Maybe a lot of the stuff. And maybe a couple of you even all the stuff. But I don't think there's anybody in here that did none of the stuff. They're going to do it. They're going to do the stuff. So you can't stop them. I mean, no matter where you put human beings, they end up doing some of the stuff. Even if you put them in solitary confinement, they still find a way. So knowing that fact, we need a different plan than elimination. The elimination plan won't work because you can't. It's not possible in almost every case, but you still have options. And I'll just specify what I think a good option is, and that is that we want to instill in them caution. Because really, the problem with the stuff is not the stuff. It's not inherently bad. It's just that doing the stuff is risky and could lead to tragedy. And that's what we're trying to stop. We're trying to prevent tragedies from happening. So my recommendation is to catch them doing the stuff and then discipline them dispassionately and use the formula that you find in the Old Testament, not in the New. This will instill in them a sense of caution. Will it stop them? No. But they'll do what they do carefully because they think they're going to get caught, and if they get caught, they're going to have to pay dearly. I had a client a few years ago. Her son was one of those 36 ACT kids, you know, normal. So he's in 3/4 of the way through his senior year, and he's done everything. Or, you know, he could walk out of school with all his credits. And so he's got a little free time on his hands. He gets a little case of senioritis, and he's got scholarships at some major institutions, and he's, in his mother's mind, putting those at risk because he's starting to do a little smoking, joking, and toking. And so she comes to me about him, and I meet with him. He becomes my client for the remaining weeks of the school year, and I shared with her what I thought she should do, and she was smart, and she was also the kind of woman that could kind of recruit people easily in her neighborhood and her friend group. And so she got the parents of his friends together for a meeting at her house, and they turned into a little miniature CIA, NSA, FBI. And they all had assignments. They all were on this perpetual information gathering quest on these kids. And it turns out the kids are really not very careful with the information that will reveal what they're up to. Now, just as an aside, part of my job involves doing marriage counseling. And anybody that does marriage counseling ends up confronting infidelity frequently. And there is a possession that everybody seems to have now that is absolutely instrumental in the detection of infidelity. In every case, no exceptions. Do you know what that item is? What that possession is? I'll show you one. It's all in there. People are ill-prepared for what this device contains and can do. And everybody gets caught. If you, like for example, if I'm looking at people, odds are somebody in this room is having an affair. I got to tell you the bad news. You're going to get caught. And the reason you're going to get caught is because of this, or your email. It's just going to happen. Because we don't really understand how to manage the information flow. And these kids, they're not nearly as wily or smart as we are. They can't handle the information flow that's currently around them. So, this mom, she turns her little group into the CIA, NSA, FBI, and starts gathering information, and they figure it out. They figure out where the party is and when, who's got the pot, where they bought it. They're overhearing conversations in cars. They're overhearing conversations on the phone. There's checking cell phones, and they got the material. And so the kids, they go all to the edge of Omaha, and they get out the keg and get out the baggie and start rolling up fatties and firing them up. And along comes 12 cars, nice cars, and these are the parents. 15, 20 minutes into the party, and gather up all the kids and take them home. So anyway, I'm talking to one of the kids, the kid that has senioritis, and he's telling me about this. And I can't let him know what I know, so I just am like, well, how are they finding out about this? How do you think they're finding out? You go, I know how they're finding out. Yeah, we know. My mom hired a private detective. We know what he looks like. We know what he looks like. This is my point. This mother got so deeply into these kids' heads that they knew they were being followed. And they knew what the guy looked like. And there was no private detective. She just like psyched them out. Now, does that mean they didn't do the stuff? No, it didn't mean that at all. It just meant that they were really cautious in doing it. And when these kids do the stuff cautiously, the chances of tragedy go way, way down. That's what we're after, is to minimize tragedy, not to minimize their exposure to this stuff. And there is a way of doing that. The formula is catch them doing it, dispassionately discipline them. Will it mean they don't ever do it? No, but they'll be more careful. Allow pain and suffering. Man, we're so bad at this. I hate where I'm going to come from here. I'm looking out, I'm pretty sure I'm the oldest person in this room. And so I hate coming up with, when I was a kid, stuff. But it was different to the extent that I was on my own for lots of stuff. And how much get over it there was in the adult world. Like, I had a friend like I said, I'm from Montana, the land where men are men and so are the women. It's a tough, rough country anyway. But I have a friend whose mother had 12 kids. And I don't know how she was with the first couple, but as far as I'm concerned, she knew more about children than anybody with a PhD that I ever met. She knew everything there was to know. And man, if it wasn't hemorrhaging or a compound fracture, you had to deal with it on your own. She might sympathize and say, I bet that hurts. But I got stuff to do over here, because simultaneously with the 12 kids, she also ran a daycare out of her house for 25 years. And believe you me, if she were still alive, she died when she was 99, kids from all over the world would visit that house when they came to Great Falls, because they remember the impact that she had on them. And one of the things that she was really good at is letting kids settle a lot of this stuff that troubled them on their own. She's watching, always. She had like, my friend Charlie, she was like the sixth son, said, when you see her, you just see those two eyes, but she's got 14 other ones. We just don't know where they are in her body. So she saw everything, she's watching everything, and if the kids really needed her to intervene, she would, but she let them cry it out, suffer it out, whine it out. She had a little place in her house called the wine room. Oh, you need some wine, go into the wine room. And the kids would go in there and they whine, and then they come out. She goes, you feeling better? Wine does that for you, yes, don't go play. It was great. I mean, it was like time out, except before it was even invented. Now, we live in a culture, in a world, in the United States, it's never been safer, ever been safer than it is right now. Like, everything sharper than a marble's got a warning label on it. How many helmets do you have at your house? They got helmets for everything. They now make helmets for toddlers, as they're learning to walk, because they could take a terrible fall from 2.5 feet and really hurt their little head. I mean, if we find something that is an occasion for upset on the part of a child, we also will count on Madison Avenue and the delivery industry, commercial delivery industry, to give us a product so that upset won't happen again. And as a result, the kids are not learning to manage their own upsets. They're not learning to manage the natural product of living life well, which is upset, failure, concern, frustration. And, we can protect them maybe up until they're 25, but at some point, as they say in the Grateful Dead, you got to get down the stairs and out on the street all alone. And it's out there waiting for them if they don't have the skills. Years ago, I used to work with really young children, and I watched kids toddling along with their little diaper on, and they'd fall down because they couldn't walk very well, and then they'd look back at their mother to kind of go, did that hurt? I didn't feel anything myself, but you seem to be a better judge of where pain is. I had a barbecue, and I invited a bunch of shrinks to come. Right? So it's like, you can't swing a dead cat at this party without hitting this child psychologist in the face. And so this little girl, she's about 4, a little tomboyish little girl, goes to the patio door because she wants to go and use the bathroom. She reaches way up and she pulls on it. It's a big, heavy patio door, and she goes like this. That's all. And like five child psychologists jumped out of their chair to end her suffering and open that door. Or would have if I hadn't jumped in front of them. What are you doing? And isn't a cry of agony. It's a cry of effort. Let her work with the door a little bit before you get over there and intervene. She is perfectly capable of getting that door open. She does not need somebody with a PhD to do it for her. So this is all I'm suggesting is allow some pain and suffering. It's hard to witness sometimes when you know you could intervene, but it probably is powerful to not. And this is so important. Upset does not mean injury. Hurt does not mean injury. Those aren't the same. This is a tricky business I'm in, because everybody in the world that I know is a psychologist. Everybody is diagnosing everybody else. Don't you have friends with OCD? Don't you have friends with ADHD? Don't you have friends that are depressed or friends that are anxious? We have so psychologized the culture that everybody's a psychologist. But what people don't understand is that just having the symptoms of a condition doesn't mean you have the condition. So you can have a lot of symptoms that fit anxiety, but you don't get to be declared as having an anxiety disorder unless the anxiety is impairing or injuring your life. You could be terrified of flying, but as long as you fly, you don't have an anxiety disorder. But if your terror is so great that you just can't get anywhere near a plane, now we got an injury on our hands. There's far less psychological illness in the world than we actually believe. They have, my brother-in-law came out of the special forces, and in training, they had something they would say to the soldiers when they went down. They'd say, "Are you injured or are you hurt?" Because if they were injured, they would get them medical care. They don't want to mess with the machine. They want to safeguard the instrument. But if the guy just said he was hurt, then they would say, "Do you want to quit? Are you the kind of person that will quit when they're hurt, or will you play hurt?" Because we can't have people in the special forces who can't play hurt. But we are not going to play people that are injured. We're going to fix them up and put them back in the game. This is the distinction to make. Is it hurt or is it injury? In most cases, it's just hurt, and mostly what's hurt are feelings. Negotiate. Man, if there isn't a richer ground for negotiation in adolescence, I don't know what it is. We got stuff they want. Oh, and they want it bad. You know, they want the extra curfew, they want the money to take with them, they want keys to the car, they want permissions to do X, Y, and Z. And they really want that. They want the electronic products, they want the latest shoes, whatever. They want a bunch of stuff. They've got stuff we want. What do we want? We want respect, we want rule following, we want homework, we want try. We want a little more try in their world, especially their academic world, maybe in sports too. We want a little more kindness to the siblings, a little more kindness to whatever group you want to name in the neighborhood, people that are down and out. So we want stuff, they want stuff, both of us can deliver the stuff fairly easily. Is this not grounds for negotiation? Is this not grounds for doing business with each other? Couldn't we just sit down and negotiate on a deal? And the reason why I think parents should get in on this, why adults should get in on this, is because adolescents are really terrible business people. They really are. They want it so badly. Remember, they got the little tiny purple thing in their brain. It's really underdeveloped, and they got the massive big thing in their brain called the limbic system, or the emotional brain. Well, that thing gets lit up when they want something just as much as it gets lit up when they don't want something. And when they want something, that's all they can see. So they want to go to a party on Saturday night because she's going to be there. That's all they can think about. And so you sit down and you want to make a deal with the kid. You could ask him to cut off 2 or 3 little fingers. And he'd probably say, "Yeah, absolutely. Is that all?" But because, now first of all, this is really important. There's a little piece to this. You make a deal with the kid, you always get yours first. Always get yours first. Because they don't believe in promissory notes. Those are notes written by a fool. And that fool would be us if we gave him one. Tell me if you know what this means. I may have to abandon this saying because sometimes people don't understand what it means. If you throw a glove in mud, the mud does not get glovy. You know what that means? What it means, see, it was a saying from my brother-in-law's mother. I got some really cool brothers-in-law. This brother-in-law is the all-time leading scorer for the University of Montana Grizzly football team. And they have played for the national championship many times since I got out of college. But in high school, he played football. He was a legendary football player in high school, too. But when he was a junior, he fell in with some bad companions, and he started doing a little of that smoking, joking, and token stuff. And so his mother said, Bruce, if you throw a glove in mud, the mud doesn't get glovy. What she's saying is, you're a good kid, Bruce. You hang around with bad kids, the bad kids aren't going to get better. You're going to get worse. Because the bad kids have more powerful stuff. They're doing the fun stuff. It's way more exhilarating to do their stuff than it is to do your homework and come in on time, or do practice, or do your chores. So they can be kind of seductive. Doesn't mean that bad kids or good kids, doesn't mean that good kids can't get bad kids to be better, but you got to be a pretty powerful good kid. Martin Luther King, I'm sure, could have pulled it off. Mahatma Gandhi could have pulled it off. Jesus Christ obviously pulled it off. But not all kids have those skills. And so if they're good kids, they're at great risk when they hang out with bad kids. Never get physical. I'm hesitant to do this. I'll do it just a little, and that is, when I was a kid, it was different. I'm not saying it was better. I'm not saying it was worse. I will say that as a kid, I hated spanking. I hated it with a passion, but now I kind of like it. Just kidding. Just trying to make sure you're awake out there. I'm stretching to fit here. So there was a lot of spanking when I was a kid. And my friends have all done pretty darn well. There's very little spanking now. I'm not saying we should or shouldn't. I'm just saying we can't now. Because if you start getting physical with a child, you're at great risk for being reported to Child Protective Services. It's just a fact of life, and we need to adapt to the facts of life. And changing those facts doesn't seem really possible right now. So I deal with fathers particularly who sometimes get into physical encounters with their teenage sons. And I'm not saying they should never do that, but if they have to defend themselves, then they have to do something. But if it's just to defend their idea of respect, and you can't talk like that in my house, and you're not going to use that kind of language in my house, or that kind of thing, and they get physical, the one that's going to be in trouble is the dad, not the kid. And so I recommend, if it looks like it's going to get physical, to get the police involved, let them get physical. I'm not saying it's bad or good, I'm just saying that's the way it is. The last thing I need on my caseload is a family with a father that's been disempowered because he's been visited by Child Protective Services and now he's completely hands-off. That kid needs that dad in his life, and if the dad feels like I can't be in that life because of what happened, we got a bigger problem than we started with. Do not acquiesce to terrorism. It doesn't happen very often, but it happens. And the two forms of it that I've seen the most are, if I don't get what I want, I'm going to hurt somebody, or if I don't get what I want, I'm going to hurt myself. And both of those are symptomatic of underlying conditions. I recognize that. But now I got a threat on my hands. When I have a threat on my hands, I don't deal with underlying psychological conditions first. I deal with the threat first. And my mission is to make it go away. And when the threat is gone, I will take on the underlying condition. But I don't care who is in front of me. You don't get to use those kinds of threats to get what you want. So if it's, I'm going to hurt myself, I make sure I've heard the youth clearly, and that he or she means what they've said. And I give them every opportunity to take it back. And if they do take it back, and they do so in a way that convinces me that it was a mistake, and it was said in haste, it was said emotionally, it wasn't meant, and believe me, I can spend a lot of time on this making sure that that's the case, then we're fine. And if they don't successfully convince me, they are going to the hospital, and it's out of my hands. They'll go to a manual. That way I know they're safe. And when they have established they're safe to be up and around and out in the world, then I can bring them back and we can deal with the underlying condition. If in my office there's a threat to hurt somebody else, that is a crime. And I call Chief Crowley and I have him come over and get the kid. And I let those guys deal with it. When they get me back and tell me that we've taken care of this, there's no longer a threat, you can work with this youth now, then we go to work on the underlying condition. Or if Chief Crowley, our police chief, can't satisfy himself that the threat has been eliminated, then he proceeds legally. So this is my point. Right? If you empower those threats so that they produce results for a kid, that's really, really, really risky business. I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know here. Honor their identity. I got another brother-in-law. He's a 2-star general. One of the youngest in the history of the Army, or when he first made 2-star. And he's been to Iraq 3 times, Kosovo a couple times. And the reason he rose so fast is because he's so good at military life. He has 2 now 23 and 24-year-old sons. I love these kids. Great. But they went through their adolescence in his home when he was a 1-star general, and guess what? They weren't in his army. And they were establishing their own identity. That included some marijuana, it included some long hair, it included certain kinds of music, all of which General Mike found offensive and didn't want in his home. And for a little while, it was tense in that home. And then he interacted with me about this. We spent a lot of time talking about it. And what I was trying to get across to him is they are in their adolescent period of life. This is an experimental period of life. And the primary experiment being conducted is, who am I in the world? What is my identity going to be? And it's a time when the kids try out identities to see which one fits what they bring to the world best. And the one that is inherent in the family where they reside, they already know. They got that one down. They've been living it for 15, 16, 17, 18 years. So you can bet dollars to donuts they're going to try out a different one to see if that one might be better than the one the family gave me. This can be very uncomfortable for families. So if it's a politically conservative family, there's a pretty good chance at least one of the kids is going to try out political liberalism. That doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be a liberal, but they could be. But they're going to try it out because they know the conservative route. If it's a very religious family, you can bet at least one of the kids, maybe all the kids, are going to try out agnosticism and atheism. And they might just trot it out at the dinner table. I'm an atheist, right after you said grace. Which is kind of unpleasant for parents to hear when they just said grace. But if they can be cool about it, like Grandma Rice about it, the woman I told you about with 12 kids, if they can be cool about it, then it will run its course. Because kids are sort of like boomerangs. They go out and they try out a lot of stuff in the world, and if they don't end up unnecessarily dug in about something because they've been attacked for it, they tend to come back to their base values at some point. So I'm just recommending to you what I recommended to my brother-in-law. Unless it breaks the law, or it is grossly inconsistent with what you're trying to do with your family, so much so that you've impaired your relations with your neighbors, got it? Then honor their identity. Remember the tincture of time, or nothing lasts. Physicians talk about the tincture of time. A lot of the stuff that they see, they think, well, all that needs is some more time and it'll be fine. And when physicians talk to physicians, they sometimes refer to that as the tincture of time. So, I'll give you my take here. I don't have any children. I never have had, and I'm never going to, because I don't like to mess up my theories with facts. And I don't like to touch poop. I know that's part of the job. That's why I won't be shaking any of your hands later. I don't like spit up because I think of it as puke. I don't like crying for any reason. I don't like crying for no reason. I don't like crying at all. All these things are part of being a parent, as I understand it. And I routinely make jokes about that, but I'll tell you something. It isn't funny. It's not funny. I know what I missed. I see it every day. This is my time in purgatory is to be in the presence of what I'll never have. Every working day. And I would be so good now. I'd be such a great father. But when I was the right age, I was the wrong guy, And now I'm the wrong age, and I'm definitely the right guy. What can I do? This is what I do. This is how I get in on it. I get to be part of it. I get to be a fan, I suppose. I'm in the stands. Sometimes I'm even on the field, but I don't really get to do it necessarily. And one of the things that I see that parents have access to that I love is what I'm going to refer to here as faith. Moments of faith, where it's born into the world. Because you can't be an effective parent without ongoingly having faith. And faith, I don't want to necessarily tell you what you already know, but to me, faith is belief in the presence of doubt. When you complete a math answer and you check your work and you see it was all correct, you don't have faith in the answer, you know it's true. You just checked it. Faith isn't like that. Faith is there's a chance it wasn't right, but I still believe it is. And you can't be a parent and not have faith as one of the instruments that you use day in and day out. And one example that always gets to me when I see it, either on TV or in life, is when a parent is teaching a child to ride a bike. And usually, oddly enough, it's the mother who's doing this. Because she's running along behind that bike, and she's got her hand on some part of it, the seat or the fender. And the child's pedaling furiously, and both of them are afraid. And at some point, and both of them know this mother's she's got to take her hand off that bike. And at that instant, a moment of faith is born into the world, because she can't know that bike won't go down. And he or she can't know that it won't go down. They just have to have faith that it won't. And obviously, in most instances, it does. So that's an example of faith. I'm going to bring this back to the tincture of time, because this is where faith is really, really, really necessary. Because there will be time in the lives of most teenagers when they act monstrously towards people that care about them and about whom they care. And the monstrous behavior will primarily be verbal, but it'll be really unpleasant verbal behavior, and there'll be a lot of unpleasant emotion that goes with it. And what I'm recommending here is the tincture of time, to have faith that the person in the presence of that monstrous presentation has faith that inside that monstrous presentation, inside that contorted being that's in front of me now, who lived in my body for 9 months, or whatever it happens to be the nature of the relationship, inside that monstrous, ungrateful presentation is a decent, loving human being, waiting but for the tincture of time to come out into the world and make their contribution. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for your attention.